Caleb Ward had lived alone for so many years that silence had become a kind of companion. His small wooden ranch stood at the far edge of the frontier town, where the plains stretched wide and the wind moved like a slow river. Each morning, he woke before sunrise, carried buckets of water to his horses, and fixed whatever the night winds had broken. He cooked simple food, ate at the same lonely table, and rarely spoke more than a few words a day. People in town called him a good man, calm and honest, but they also said he carried a sadness he never showed. The loneliness had shaped him. He worked hard, talked little, and lived inside the quiet. His wife had died long ago during a harsh winter, and since then, he never tried to start another family. He believed that kind of happiness was not meant for him anymore. He kept to his land, his animals, and his routine. Yet sometimes at night, while the lantern flickered softly, he wondered if his life would always remain this empty. That morning, Caleb rode into town to buy feed and tools. He expected nothing unusual, but as soon as he reached the main street, he felt the air had changed. People were gathered near the sheriff's barn, whispering and pointing. Horses stomped nervously, and even the children stayed quiet, hiding behind their mothers. Caleb tied his horse and walked closer. That was when he saw it. A heavy wooden wagon, covered with thick chains and iron bars. The wheels were reinforced with metal, as if someone feared the passenger might break free. The wagon door sat locked with two large padlocks. Inside, sitting very still, was a tall native woman. She was strong-looking, her shoulders broad, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. Her long dark hair hung loosely, and her wrists showed marks from bindings that had recently been removed. She wore a torn cloth dress someone had given her after taking away her original clothing. Her face held no anger, only quiet strength mixed with a deep tiredness. People whispered she was dangerous. They called her names like Giant Bride, War Woman, and Wild One. The stories changed with every retelling. Some said she fought 10 men. Others said she threw 2 soldiers to the ground. Some even said she didn't speak at all, as if she were more spirit than human. Caleb listened, but he had learned long ago not to trust rumors. He only saw someone who looked exhausted and alone. Her eyes were not wild. They were calm, focused, and filled with something he recognized, pain mixed with dignity. It reminded him of how he felt after losing his own family. When Caleb stepped closer, she lifted her head. Their eyes met through the bars, and he felt a strange pull inside his chest. Not attraction, not fear, something quieter, a feeling that this person, like him, had been carrying too much for too long. He asked the sheriff what was happening. The sheriff explained she had been captured after a conflict between her tribe and settlers. She had defended her younger sister, but the rest of the story was unclear. The sheriff admitted even he didn't know the full truth. The town leaders had decided to auction her off as a worker or forced bride, a practice Caleb hated but had no power to change. Caleb frowned deeply. He did not believe in such things. He believed every human deserved respect, no matter who they were. But the frontier didn't always follow such beliefs. He turned again to look at the woman. She sat upright, refusing to shrink or show fear. Yet Caleb noticed something others didn't. Her hands trembled slightly, very slightly, as if she fought to maintain strength she no longer fully had. And he saw dried blood on her arm, barely cleaned. She was strong, yes, but she was also wounded, tired, and alone. When Caleb returned home that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He tried to cook his meal, but the memory of her eyes kept distracting him. He thought about how unfair life could be, how easily a person could lose everything. He knew suffering, but something about her loneliness felt even heavier than his. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cage, the chains, the exhaustion on her face. He kept thinking, she doesn't deserve this. Before dawn broke, he saddled his horse and rode back into town. The auction was set to begin that morning. People gathered again, some curious, some excited in cruel ways, some indifferent. The woman was brought out in chains, standing tall even though her legs shook a little from weariness. She still refused to bow her head. Her silence frustrated people who expected fear or begging. Caleb pushed through the crowd until he stood only a few steps away from her. Everyone turned when they saw him approach. The quiet rancher rarely stepped into the center of attention, so his presence surprised everyone. Tala, though Caleb did not yet know her name, looked at him again. This time her expression softened just a little, as if recognizing that he was the only person who saw her like a human being. Caleb's throat felt dry. He had no plan, no clever words. He only had an overwhelming feeling that he could not let her be sold to someone who would treat her as property. He stood there, heart pounding, unsure what to do. People started laughing, telling him to move aside. Someone joked, "Careful, Ward, she'll crush you." More laughter followed. Caleb didn't respond. He kept his eyes on her. Then, without fully understanding why, he said the words that had formed in his heart during the night. "Please, marry me." The crowd erupted in mixed reactions: shock, laughter, confusion, disbelief. Even the sheriff blinked in surprise. But the woman, she did not laugh. She stared at him with wide eyes, clearly not expecting such a request. For the first time since he had seen her, her expression changed completely. It wasn't fear or anger. It was pure confusion, mixed with something that almost looked like hope, though faint. Caleb continued, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to use you. I can't let them treat you like this. If marrying me means you don't have to be locked away or forced into someone's control, then I'm willing." The sheriff stepped forward, reminding Caleb of the legal terms. If he offered himself as a lawful husband, he could take her from town custody. But he had to pay a fee, everything she might have sold for. It was an unfair law, but the only way to free her. People whispered and argued. No one understood why a quiet rancher would spend so much on a woman everyone feared. Caleb didn't care. He pulled out the leather pouch he had been saving for years, money he had earned through sweat and hard winters. He handed it over without hesitation. It was nearly all he had. The sheriff counted it, nodded slowly, and said, "It's enough." The chains were removed from her wrists. She rubbed them gently, staring at Caleb as though trying to understand his intentions. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But she didn't step away from him either. The crowd murmured, disappointed that the excitement ended too calmly. Caleb turned to her and said softly, "You can come with me. I won't force anything. You're safe." She studied him for a long moment, trying to read the truth in his eyes. Then she gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. That was all. Caleb led his horse forward. She walked beside him, tall and strong, even with exhaustion draining her. As they moved through the crowd, people stepped back, unsure what to think. When they reached the outskirts of town, she finally spoke her first word to him, her voice low but steady. "Why?" Caleb looked at her and answered honestly, "Because no one deserves to be caged, and because I saw you were alone, just like me." Something in her hardened expression softened, just a little. She didn't reply, but her eyes lingered on him longer this time, as if she was beginning to understand the kind of man he truly was. They walked together toward his ranch, two strangers bound by an unexpected decision, each carrying years of pain, and neither realizing yet how deeply their lives would change from this moment forward. The ride back to Caleb's ranch was quiet, and neither of them knew what to say. The morning sun warmed the dry earth, and dust rose behind the horses' slow steps. Caleb walked beside the horse, letting the woman ride because she looked tired. She held the saddle carefully, her posture straight, her eyes observing every field and tree as if she needed to learn this new world quickly. She still didn't trust him, but she was no longer afraid he would hurt her. Caleb kept a respectful distance. He didn't walk too close, didn't look at her too long, and didn't ask her any questions she wasn't ready to answer. He remembered how it felt when people crowded him after his wife died, asking things he couldn't speak about. He didn't want her to feel pressured like that. When they reached the ranch, Caleb stopped near the gate and gently reached for the horse's reins. She watched his hand carefully but relaxed when she saw he wasn't doing anything sudden. He offered his hand if she needed help getting down, but she didn't take it. Instead, she climbed down by herself with steady movements. She stood tall, almost as tall as Caleb, but he didn't seem bothered. He simply nodded and led the horse into the shade. The woman looked around the ranch yard. There were a few wooden buildings, a small barn, a fenced area for the animals, and a porch with a rocking chair that rarely moved. Everything was simple, but clean and cared for. She sensed that this place belonged to someone who worked with quiet dedication. Caleb noticed her studying the house. "You can rest inside," he said gently. "The room on the right is clean." "It's yours." She looked at him carefully, still trying to understand what kind of man he was. She walked toward the porch slowly, as if expecting a trick or hidden danger. But there was none. The door was unlocked. The room was tidy, with clean sheets on the bed, a small table, and a window that showed the open fields. For a moment, she simply stood there, surprised. She had expected a dark storeroom or a corner on the floor. Instead, she found a simple but honest space prepared for a human being. She placed her hand on the blanket, feeling the softness. It had been a long time since she had touched anything soft. When Caleb returned with a jug of water and a cup, he placed them on the table and stepped back quickly so she wouldn't feel threatened. "If you need anything, I'll be outside," he said. Then he left the room without waiting for thanks. She sat on the bed and drank the water slowly. It was cool, clean, and refreshing. Her body felt lighter. She rested her head against the wall and closed her eyes for a few minutes. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't the heavy silence of a cage. It was peaceful. After resting, she walked to the doorway and saw Caleb repairing the fence. He worked with patience, hammering nails into fresh boards. He didn't look at her, not even once, as if he didn't want her to feel watched. He simply worked. She had seen many men who enjoyed showing their power or strength, but this man used his strength only for his land and his animals. She stepped closer, and Caleb finally turned. She spoke her first full sentence to him, her voice firm but unsure in English. "I want to help." Caleb blinked. "You don't need to. You should rest." She shook her head. "Rest later. Work is better." He didn't argue. He simply handed her another board and showed her where it needed to go. She carried it effortlessly, surprising him. He realized then that her strength came not from anger or aggression, but from years of surviving and protecting her people. Together, they fixed the fence. Hours passed, and they worked silently, side by side. Caleb admired how she didn't complain, didn't rest, and didn't slow down. She admired how he didn't shout, didn't order, and didn't watch her with suspicion. They were two strangers working in quiet harmony. Around noon, Caleb cooked a simple meal, beans, bread, and warm vegetables. When he brought it to her, she hesitated. She had eaten food from cruel hands before, so her body reacted with caution. Caleb noticed her hesitation and gently placed the bowl on the table. "Eat if you want. If not, it's all right." He stepped outside again, leaving her alone. That simple act, giving her space, giving her choice, meant more than he realized. She took a small bite. The food was plain, but it was warm and safe. She ate the rest steadily. When she finished, she stepped outside and found Caleb feeding the horses. She approached him again, slowly, as if testing his reactions. "What name?" she asked, pointing at him. He smiled softly. "Caleb." She repeated it. "Caleb." Her voice was careful but confident. He pointed toward her. "And you?" She hesitated. It had been months since she had said her own name, but she finally spoke. "Tala." Caleb repeated it respectfully. "Tala." It sounded natural when he said it. She nodded, accepting the way he said it. For the first time, her face showed a small hint of calmness. That evening, Caleb showed her around the ranch. He pointed to the water well, the storage shed, the barn, the fields where wildflowers grew, and the small stream behind the house. Tala walked beside him quietly, absorbing every detail. She felt strange, not because of fear, but because she didn't understand why this man cared about her comfort. When the sun began to set, Caleb stood on the porch, looking at the orange sky. Tala walked up behind him. She did not stand too close, but close enough to show she felt a little safer now. The sky glowed softly, and the fields stretched endlessly. Tala finally asked the question she had held inside all day. "Why choose me?" Caleb didn't look at her right away. He was thinking carefully. He didn't want to say something poetic or dramatic. He wanted to tell the truth. "I saw you in that cage," he said quietly. "You reminded me of myself. After I lost my family, you looked strong, but also alone. No one deserves to face the world alone." Tala watched him closely. She had heard many men speak big words, but none had spoken with such simple honesty. She thought for a moment, then said, "I do not know how to be a wife." Caleb turned to her gently. "You don't need to be anything today, or tomorrow. We don't have to hurry anything. You're free here. You can stay in your own room. You can help if you want, or rest if you need. We'll figure everything slowly." Tala felt something tighten in her chest, something that wasn't fear or anger. It was the beginning of trust. That night she stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She thought of her lost tribe, her sister, her suffering. She thought of how Caleb stood in front of those men at the auction without fear. She wondered why he spent all his money on a stranger. She wondered why, for the first time in many months, she didn't fall asleep afraid. Outside, Caleb slept lightly, listening for any sound from her room in case she needed help. But she didn't come out. She simply lay in her bed, letting her mind rest for the first time. The next morning, when Caleb stepped outside, he stopped in surprise. Tala was already awake and working. She had cleaned the entire yard, swept the porch, and was feeding the chickens. She didn't look at him when he approached, but she said, "Work is good." Caleb nodded. "Only if you want to." She glanced at him and then continued feeding the chickens. For someone who had spent months in chains, having simple freedom felt like breathing again. As days passed, Tala began learning English faster. Caleb spoke slowly so she could understand. She learned the names of the animals, the tools, the parts of the ranch. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she simply watched him quietly. Caleb also learned things about her without needing her to explain. He saw how she reacted to sudden noises. She tensed. He saw how she stepped back when someone raised a hand too quickly, even if it was just to wave. He saw how she slept lightly, waking at the smallest sound. He realized how much she had endured. And Tala began noticing him too. She noticed how he treated animals gently, how he never raised his voice, how he thanked her for helping even though he didn't need to. She noticed that he never entered her room unless she called him. One evening, she sat by the fire with him, still keeping a respectful distance. She watched the flames reflect in his eyes. After a long silence, she said softly, "I did not believe any man could be kind without wanting something." Caleb didn't respond right away. He simply looked at the fire and whispered, "Kindness should not be traded. It should be given." Tala absorbed his words slowly. Maybe kindness could exist without a price. When she finally stood up to go to her room, she paused at the doorway and looked back. For the first time, she offered him a small nod, her way of showing gratitude. Caleb nodded back. It was not love. It was not closeness. It was not understanding. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something new, something fragile, gentle, and built on quiet respect. The lonely rancher who once believed he would die alone now had someone who worked beside him. And the feared, caged woman who once believed she would never be free had finally found a place where she could breathe again. Neither of them knew where this strange, unexpected bond would lead. But for the first time in a long time, both felt a small, warm hope entering their lives. Spring moved slowly across the land, warming the frozen soil and bringing new life to the ranch. Trees grew fresh leaves and green patches began to spread across the dry fields. Caleb noticed how the changing season also changed the atmosphere in his home. Tala, who had arrived silent, cautious, and unsure, now moved with a calmer strength. The heaviness in her steps had faded, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity. Each morning, Caleb found her already awake, gathering water from the well or tending to the animals. She learned quickly how to brush the horses, how to feed the cattle, how to repair tools, and how to keep the ranch running smoothly. She didn't speak much, but she understood everything she needed to. And when she did speak, she chose her words carefully, like someone learning to trust her own voice again. Caleb never asked her to work, yet she worked beside him every day. He understood that work gave her peace. It kept her mind steady and her heart strong. And in return, he treated her not as someone who owed him anything, but as someone who shared the space with him equally. One morning, while Tala was tending to the horses, she noticed one of the younger ones limping. She touched its leg gently, speaking softly in her own language. The horse calmed immediately. Caleb stood nearby, surprised, watching how naturally she connected with the animals. "You're good with them," he said. Tala looked at him and gave a small nod. "Horses understand fear. When someone is gentle, they listen." "You're gentle?" Caleb asked with a tiny smile. She lifted an eyebrow, a hint of humor appearing for the first time. "Sometimes." Caleb laughed quietly. It was the first time she had teased him, even slightly. The simple exchange made the rest of the morning feel lighter. As weeks passed, Tala started sharing pieces of her past, not all at once, but in small fragments, the way a person carefully places stones to build a path. She spoke about her tribe, her home near the mountains, her sister who she had been trying to protect when the conflict happened. The pain in her eyes when she mentioned her sister made Caleb's heart tighten. She did not cry, but her silence after speaking said more than any tears could. Caleb never pushed her for more details. He just listened. That was all she needed. One evening, as they sat near the fire outside, Tala held a wooden stick and drew simple shapes in the dirt. At first, they looked like random marks, but Caleb soon realized they were symbols, perhaps from her tribe. She looked up at him quietly, as if trying to decide whether to explain. "This is home," she said, pointing to a mountain shape. "This is the river. This is the field where we hunted." Her voice softened as she tapped a small circle. "This was my sister." Caleb lowered his gaze, giving her space. She continued, her voice steady. "I do not know where she is now. I only know she ran when I told her to run." Caleb hesitated before speaking. "Maybe someday you'll find her again." Tala shook her head. "The world is wide. She could be anywhere." "Then we'll search wide," Caleb said simply, as if it were the most natural promise in the world. Tala looked up sharply, surprised. No one had ever offered to help her search for her family. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "You would help me?" she asked. "Yes," Caleb replied, meeting her eyes. "No one should lose their family without trying." Tala stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked away, as if overwhelmed by the idea that someone would make such a promise without expecting anything in return. But their peaceful bond was not welcomed by everyone. Rumors began to spread in town. People whispered that Caleb had made a mistake bringing her home. Some claimed she was still dangerous. Others were angry because Caleb had refused to share details of her presence with them. A few men said it wasn't right for someone like her to walk free. The whispers turned into small gatherings at the saloon, and soon a few men decided to interfere. They believed Tala should be brought back under the town's control. They convinced themselves they were doing the right thing, though deep down, they were acting out of fear and ignorance. One afternoon, while Caleb repaired the roof and Tala gathered herbs near the creek, 3 men from the town rode up to the ranch. Their footsteps shook the ground as they approached the porch. Caleb climbed down from the ladder quickly, sensing trouble. The first man, a tall fellow with rough features, crossed his arms and said, "We need to see the woman. The town wants to make sure she's kept under control." Caleb's eyes hardened. "She's not a prisoner. She's under my protection. There's no reason for the town to be concerned." Another man stepped forward. "We heard she's been walking around freely. That's dangerous. We're here to fix that." Caleb stepped between them and the doorway. "She hasn't harmed anyone. You have no right to come here." The men exchanged looks. They had expected Caleb to be nervous or intimidated. Instead, they found someone calm but unyielding. "She belongs to the town," the first man argued. "No," Caleb said firmly. "She's my wife and my responsibility. You won't touch her." The finality in his tone surprised the men. They hadn't expected the quiet rancher to stand so firmly. One of them took a step forward as if to push past him, but Caleb placed a hand on his chest, not aggressively, but clearly enough to block him. "You need to leave," Caleb said. "Now." The men hesitated, glancing at each other. They weren't used to being refused, especially not by someone as quiet as Caleb. But something in his eyes, an unwavering calmness, made them step back. "This isn't over, Ward," one of them growled. Caleb didn't respond. He simply watched them until they mounted their horses and rode away, their anger trailing behind them like dust in the wind. Unseen by the men, Tala had been standing behind the corner of the house. She had returned from the creek and witnessed the entire confrontation. Her breath trembled as she stepped forward. "You stood for me," she said quietly. Caleb turned, the tension in his shoulders relaxing when he saw her. "Of course." Tala looked down, her fingers curling slightly. "You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did," Caleb replied. "No one has the right to take your peace away." She lifted her head slowly, meeting his eyes. Something deep in her heart shifted at that moment, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Respect, trust, and a warmth that frightened her because it felt too close to hope. The next weeks brought a new closeness between them, not through words but through small actions. Tala left him an extra piece of bread on the table when she cooked. Caleb fixed her shoes when they tore from working in the fields. Tala placed fresh flowers near his wife's old picture, honoring his past without asking about it. Caleb taught her how to read simple words, sitting beside her on the porch while the evening sun painted the sky. One evening, while the stars brightened above them, Caleb asked quietly, "Do you feel safe here?" Tala looked at the fields, the house, the sky. She took a deep breath. "I feel like my breath is returning." Caleb smiled gently. "Then that's enough." She studied the sky for a moment before saying something she never imagined she would say. "You are a strange man, Caleb." "How so?" He chuckled. "You give without asking," she said. "Most men take first." Caleb looked at her seriously. "You've given too much to the world already. I won't add to your burden." Tala's eyes softened. She didn't speak again, but she didn't need to. The silence between them was peaceful, warm, and full of unspoken understanding. As the night grew deeper, she looked at him once more. There was no fear, no hesitation, only sincerity. "I will stand with you too," she said softly, "as you stand with me." Caleb nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "We'll stand together then." At that moment, the loneliness that once filled Caleb's home drifted away, replaced by something new, something steady, respectful, and growing quietly, like spring grass pushing through winter soil. They were still strangers in many ways. They still had miles to walk before fully understanding each other. But now, they were no longer walking alone. And for both Caleb and Tala, that changed everything. Summer settled over the land, warming the fields until the grass shone a soft golden green. Caleb's ranch appeared livelier than it had in years. The horses moved freely in the open yard. The chickens clucked around Tala's feet, and the once quiet house now felt full of steady movement. Tala's presence did not fill the space with noise, but with life. Her calm footsteps, her soft voice, and her quiet strength changed the home in ways Caleb had never imagined possible. Every morning, Tala woke early before the sun rose. She stepped outside, breathed in the cool air, and watched the sky brighten. Caleb would join her shortly after, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. They didn't always speak in those early hours. Sometimes they just watched the sunrise together, sharing the silence in a way that felt peaceful rather than lonely. Caleb noticed that Tala laughed more often now. Her laugh was quiet, almost shy, but it filled the air with warmth. Sometimes she laughed at the horse's silly behavior. Sometimes at Caleb's attempts to teach her new words that sounded strange to her ears. Each time she laughed, it made Caleb smile in a way he never thought he could again. One day, as they worked side by side repairing the barn roof, Tala asked a question that surprised him. "Why do you work so slowly?" Caleb paused, confused. "Slowly?" She nodded, tapping the wood with a hammer. "You take time. You think before every step. You do not rush." He smiled faintly. "I guess that's just how I am." She looked at him thoughtfully. "It is good. Rushing breaks things." Her words carried more meaning than she realized. Caleb felt the truth settle in his heart. Rushing through life had only ever brought pain. This slow, steady life with Tala, this was something different, something safe. Yet despite the peace between them, Tala still carried unspoken questions. Questions about whether she truly belonged here, whether she had the right to stay, whether she could build a life after losing everything. At night, Caleb sometimes saw her sitting by the window staring at the stars. She never said what she was thinking, but he knew she was wondering about her sister, her people, and her past. Caleb didn't interrupt her thoughts. He only let her know quietly, "If you ever need anything, or if you ever want to search for your family, I will help you." Tala would nod, appreciating his support more than words could express. But the world around them was not entirely calm. The men who had come to the ranch weeks earlier still felt anger toward Caleb for refusing them. Their pride was wounded, and wounded pride often led to poor decisions. Rumors spread again. Some said Caleb was being controlled. Some said Tala was dangerous. Some said the town should not allow outsiders so close. As these whispers grew louder, the men eventually found the courage to return. It was late afternoon when 3 riders appeared at the ranch. Tala saw them first as she carried a basket of vegetables toward the house. She froze, sensing danger immediately, and placed the basket down. Caleb stepped outside right as the riders slowed to a stop near the gate. The same tall man from before rode forward. His voice held no friendliness. "Ward, we talked about this. The town is uneasy. We need to take the woman back." Caleb stood firm. "You have no right to take anything from my home. Leave." The man narrowed his eyes. "We're doing what's best for everyone. She doesn't belong here." Tala stepped closer, silently standing behind Caleb. She did not hide, but she did not confront them either. She simply stood tall, calm, and composed. The men stared at her with unease. She didn't yell or show anger, but her steady presence made them step back a little. They weren't prepared for her quiet confidence. It wasn't the strength of someone threatening. It was the strength of someone who refused to be shattered again. Caleb's voice remained steady. "You're not taking her. Not now, not ever. She's safe here. She's done nothing wrong." The first man looked frustrated. He opened his mouth to argue again, but when he met Caleb's gaze, he hesitated. Caleb wasn't a fighter by nature, yet there was something unbreakable in him at that moment. Not anger, not pride, just a firm, steady belief that Tala deserved peace. After a long silence, the man spat on the ground and turned his horse. "Fine, but you're choosing the hard path, Ward." The men rode away, their words fading with the dust. Tala watched them disappear. She felt a strange tightness in her chest. Not fear, but something heavier. She turned to Caleb slowly. "Why do you stand for me like this?" Caleb looked at her with honesty. "Because you deserve someone standing with you." Her eyes softened, and for a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she stepped a little closer. "Where I come from, someone who stands beside you becomes your home." Caleb felt warmth rise in his chest, deeper than anything he had felt in years. The next days passed peacefully again, though both of them carried the memory of the confrontation. Something had changed between them. They ate meals together, shared stories more openly, and spent evenings sitting on the porch side by side. Tala even began teaching Caleb a few words from her language. She laughed when he pronounced them incorrectly, and Caleb laughed too, happy to hear her voice brighten. One afternoon, Caleb found Tala near the stream, sitting on a rock, dipping her feet into the cool water. She looked peaceful, almost like she had grown roots in this land. Caleb approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her moment of calm. She looked up and gestured for him to sit beside her. He sat, letting the warm breeze move across his face. After a quiet moment, she said, "I want to tell you something." Caleb turned to her gently. "I'm listening." She took a slow breath. "When I first came here, I thought I would never feel free again. I thought I would never trust anyone. But this place, this land, this peace, it changed something inside me." Caleb didn't interrupt. She continued softly. "You treat me like a person, not a prisoner, not a burden, not something to fear. You gave me a room, food, space, and respect. You gave me safety." Caleb's voice was calm. "You deserved all of it." Tala looked into his eyes. "I stayed in that room because I did not know if I belonged. I worked because I did not want to be useless. I watched you because I wanted to understand you." "And did you?" he asked with a small smile. "A little," she said. "You are a good man, Caleb. A patient man. A man who hurts quietly but cares deeply." Her words struck a part of him he thought had been asleep forever. Then she spoke the words that completed the silent journey they had been on for months. "I want to stay, not because I must. Not because you bought my freedom, but because I choose to stay." Caleb felt something shift inside him, something warm and steady. Tala, you don't have to decide anything now. She shook her head. I already decided. Caleb looked at her with a softness he didn't know he still had. Then I'm honored. Tala reached out slowly, not quickly, not boldly, but with quiet trust, and placed her hand over his. Her touch was gentle, her fingers warm. It was the first time she had touched him willingly. Caleb didn't move. He didn't squeeze her hand or pull her closer. He simply let their hands rest together, both feeling the quiet connection forming between them. Later that evening, they walked back to the house together. The sky glowed with orange and pink colors as the sun lowered behind the hills. Tala stood on the porch, watching the birds return to their nests. Caleb stood beside her, neither speaking, both feeling the closeness settle naturally. After a long silence, Tala said softly, "You gave me a life again." Caleb replied just as softly, "You brought life back to this home." They both looked out into the open fields, their hands still close, their breaths matching the gentle rhythm of the land. The lonely rancher had found companionship he never expected. The feared, caged woman had become someone strong, trusted, and peaceful. They did not rush into anything. They did not force their bond. They simply continued building a life together, slowly, steadily, and with respect. And in the quiet of that ranch, under the endless frontier sky, Caleb and Tala finally stood not as two strangers brought together by chance, but as two souls who chose each other with open, peaceful hearts.